Can I be absolutely clear in that this bill before this House today, which should be rejected, is not just a bad and unworkable bill, but a fundamentally flawed and dangerous bill. Honourable members across the House have quite rightly stated that it doesn't just prevent public bodies such as local councils from involving themselves in foreign policy as the government innocently declare it does. It meddles in the autonomy of local government pension schemes to make the best investment decisions. It swings a wrecking ball through the UK's obligations to respect international law and countless United Nations resolutions. It undermines the ability of public bodies and civic society to divest from those who are harming our environment and driving climate change. It provides the government with unprecedented and deeply alarming powers of enforcement that curtail freedom of expression and democracy by gagging public bodies who have the audacity to speak and act on their conscience. And it forces public bodies and civic society to kneel against their own moral convictions to the Secretary of State's foreign policy. But most alarmingly, Madam Deputy Speaker, by preventing public bodies from adopting positions which deviate from this government's foreign policy of turning a blind eye to persecution, oppression and injustice in other countries, the bill quashes the ability of those individuals, public bodies and members of civic society with any sense of humanity to take a stand against human rights abuses at a time when we are seeing a rapid increase in those abuses right across the world. Each of these reasons on their own is enough to bin this bill. But taken together, it is not only one of the most far-reaching and dangerous pieces of legislation that this government have ever sought to make law, but one of the most repressive, and that's why it must be struck down today. As pointed out by honourable members across the House, this bill also directly contradicts what are decades of established UK foreign policy regarding illegal Israeli settlements built in occupied Palestinian land. It is astounding, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it has to be repeated in this chamber time and time again. Settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal under international law. So why does this bill not recognise this international position? Instead of introducing legislation to Parliament that provides cover to the Netanyahu government's illegal annexation of Palestinian territory, ministers must decide whether they agree with the established position of the rest of the international community that these settlements and the Israeli government's repeated disregard for international law are illegal. And as stated by honourable members, the bill as it currently stands is in direct contravention of not just international law, but United Nations resolutions too. Madam Deputy Speaker, many of us fear also the anti-democratic precedent this bill will set. Effectively, if a human rights campaign does not enjoy the support of the government, it will be criminalised for attempting to bring abuses to light. The Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the Rohingya in Burma, the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, and the Kashmiris in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Members of these communities, many of whom are resident in my constituency, have now had their fear doubled. Not only are they witnessing numerous human rights abuses in their countries of origin, they are now being silenced here too. Indeed, until just recently, the UK government refused to approve sanctions against the Burmese military, despite the horrific genocidal campaign that they waged against the Rohingya, with ministers declaring that they did not want to unbalance what existed of Burma's democratic government. And instead it was left to other organisations and groups to lead the resistance against the genocide taking place while the UK government looked on. But whilst the government is in a better place on this issue today, we're still left with the question of what happens if there is a return to the same form of democratic government in Burma that existed before and which allowed the Rohingya genocide to take place. Because it's clear that ministers will lift sanctions and force local authorities to do the same through this bill, leaving the perpetrators of genocide able to escape justice and accountability for their grave crimes against humanity. Madam Deputy Speaker, the impact that this bill will have on human rights in Indian-occupied Kashmir, where Kashmiris continue to face persecution, oppression and injustice, is even more alarming, because it is in this region that UK foreign policy under this Tory government is not only most unreliable but most spineless. Even as the Indian government blatantly engages in violent physical and psychological suppression of any resistance to the military occupation, however peaceful it may be, and seeks to deter further opposition to their brutal rule by making an example of campaigners such as Yasin Malik, whose execution Indian prosecutors are now seeking, all that the UK government remains focused on is securing a trade deal with the right-wing Modi government before the next general election. They could not even bring themselves to object to and boycott, as other countries did, the shameful decision to hold the G20 Culture Working Group Summit last month in Srinagar. And in the absence of the UK government stepping up to fulfil their historic, moral and international obligations to the region, it is once again left to local councils and public bodies to do what they can to protect human rights in Indian-occupied Kashmir by refusing to engage with those whose hands are stained with the blood of Kashmiris. Yet under this bill, the government will put a stop to it and force public bodies to be party to human rights abuses because the government thinks it's in the UK's best foreign interests. Madam Deputy Speaker, this rotten, unworkable and dangerous bill is an alarming overreach of government powers that breaks the UK international obligations, undermines efforts to protect our environment and fight climate change, protect human rights abusers in countless nations, and gags democratically elected local representatives. We cannot pick and choose which human rights abuses to act on and which to turn a blind eye to. And let me be absolutely clear, human rights are a universal obligation, a universal right, and it's time the UK government accepted that, and I will therefore be standing up, as I always have done, for democracy, for our environment and for human rights by voting today's amendment that will reject the bill.